Today, Paul and I are looking back through the Blind Pig and the Acorn music archives. We have a separate channel called Blind Pig and the Acorn that's full of all of our family's music. Started in 2008, and we still upload to it today, so you can definitely go check that out. But the song we're going to talk about today is There's Nothing for a Poor Man in This World. We just always called it Poor Man, but you think that's the correct name?
I'm not sure. I never looked it up.
We just called it Poor Man. But it's a really great song, kind of a blues song, kind of thinking about the common man and the troubles that you go through and things that happen to you in life. And we first learned it a long time ago. Paul actually learned it first, but when I first became aware of it was back in 2011 on the Blind Pig and the Acorn. My blog, I was kind of going through this series of make-do kind of foods, like when you didn't have much money and what was it, beans and taters, beans and rice, a lot of people will eat, but just kind of how to make do. And one day we were down at Paul's picking and grinning on a Sunday evening, and I said, I need a song about making do. If you got a song about making do, we should do the song, learn it, and I should record it, and we can put it on the YouTube channel, and then I can use it on Blind Pig and the Acorn. So Paul said he had the perfect song, and it was the Poor Man song. It's really got a nice melody and all that. It's very fun to play if you're playing it. I always thought on the bass it was a real fun song to play. But I love different parts of it, the whole little story that it tells. Kind of the one part of it is perfect for this time of the year because he talks about growing a garden and he didn't have any rain and he prayed for rain. And then what happened? A big flood come and washed it all away. So it's kind of like one of those, you just can't seem to get ahead or win. And right now, kind of what a lot of people suffering from the things going on financially, it kind of fits for that too. My favorite part of it is the last verse, though. He kind of tells it's going to be okay, telling his baby, his wife, or is who I assumed it would be. But he says every which way. He uses that word to kind of give her some hope, every which way kind of it goes. And I love that part because there's, even noted in the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English, there's a whole little set of how we use the word ever in Appalachia. You think about, we say ever who, ever what, ever which, ever when. All those kind of things are so common that's how I use them in everyday speech, and people around me do, Paul, Matt, Granny, whoever. But it is noted in the dictionary that that's an unusual kind of usage, and that was why Michael Montgomery put it in there. But I'm going to let Paul tell you a little bit about how he found the song, because it's a really interesting story.
Well, that's funny because I don't remember you asking me, do you have a song about hard times or whatever, but...
Yeah, and I probably would not remember that either, but I documented it on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, so I can go back and be like, oh, I asked Paul. So that's how I remember it. Yeah.
That's been a while, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, the way I found the song or became aware of the song, you and I were talking about this yesterday, and I was telling you that it crossed my mind. It's funny because someone can influence your life and change the direction of your life by having a frequent interaction with you, like a parent, or maybe even a teacher that you spend a whole entire year with. Or it can be somebody that you sort of just crossed paths with you, and they can just in a brief period of time set different things in motion so that has an influence on you. And would that have been late 90s that you were at Tri-County Community College?
Yeah.
And you had a class...
Well, not late 90s, I guess, because that would have been before I had Corey and Katie, so I guess early 90s. Early 90s, yeah.
You had a class on Appalachian Studies, and the teacher was John Cabe, who really, in a sense, just lives right over these ridges over in Pinhook, kind of the next big holler over. And you would come home and you would talk with me and Pap about things that you learned and you studied there. Now, as far as having that big influence, I don't just mean leading to us doing this song, because us doing that song, it was just another song, in a sense, but because if you hadn't had that class, you probably wouldn't have started the Blind Pig and the Acorn blog. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing right now, which is your entire career.
Yeah.
You didn't need John Cabe to tell you about Appalachian culture because you grew up in Appalachian culture. But by taking that class, I feel like you saw it sort of through a different lens, as they say. Yeah. And you started to think, oh, wow, my culture that I just kind of take for granted and live every day, that's interesting to people. That's something that can be studied. And one of the videos that you brought home, I can picture this guy. He might have been a Lomax. I don't know, but kind of a heavy-set guy with a beard. And the video was just all about Appalachian culture. And it wasn't all about music, but there was a section that was about music. He talked about the difference between Appalachian music and bluegrass, and yes, there is a difference. And the Appalachian music came first. He talked about that, and he had a pretty big section that was devoted to the song Tom Dooley. And actually that song is on the list of the top 100 biggest songs of all time, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And I think it's toward the top because the Kingston Trio had such a massive hit with it in the 60s with the whole folk revival. So he's telling the story of how that song originated. Now the song is super old, and in that video he even shows really old newspaper clippings from the 1860s, I believe, when a fellow named Tom Dooley was on trial, and yes, there was a love triangle. He tells all that. But the farthest back it could be documented was a fellow named Frank Proffitt, who I believe lived in West Virginia.
No, he's in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah,
Well, that makes it even cooler.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's in North Carolina.
So in the process of talking about Frank Proffitt, they showed Frank Proffitt Jr., who at the time at least was still alive and well. I hope he still is now. This video looked like it was maybe made in the 80s, if I were guessing, late 80s.
Maybe.
And he's talking about his dad's music and everything, and he sits down, he takes a dulcimer out, and he sings this song. He might have called it Poor Man Blues, or somebody might call it that. He said his dad wrote it, and maybe one of his uncles, some other relative, and it truly had come a big kind of flood almost, or gully washer, and I believe it was their cabbage patch that was just totally wiped out.
I think it says maybe corn taters and cabbage corn.
In the
taters.
song it says that.
But, in
the actual event, I think it may have just been a big cabbage patch that was ruined, that they were probably planning on selling, as a way to make their livelihood.
Yeah.
And he says they sat down and they sang their misery out. That's what they did. They sang their misery out.
That.
So they just kind of went to singing, and they sang this song. Pap and I immediately liked that. One reason we liked it is we'd never seen anyone play the dulcimer that way. People in Brasstown around here that we'd heard play the dulcimer, they always picked it, usually with kind of a flat, almost rectangular picture, like a piece of paper that you would roll a cigarette with, but stiffer than that.
Yeah.
They would just pick it like this. Well, Frank Proffitt Jr., this part, I guess he did kind of the same, but this part he was rolling with his fingers, more like a Merle Travis kind of way of playing, or an Earl Scruggs, and so that was really pretty. In the video, you don't get to hear the entire song; you just hear a couple of verses.
Yeah.
So that's all I knew, but sometime over time I maybe learned some more. And another reason Pap and I liked that song, and this was just something that was common to the two of us. I don't think he necessarily taught me to be this way. It was just sort of an inherent thing that we liked any song that was about hard times, and we would think of the song seriously, but we would also think of the song comically. I don't know if that makes sense. But the part about I got down and I prayed for rain, and I got it, but I got too much.
Yeah.
It was sad, but it was also kind of funny in a way.
Yeah.
And then there's a verse
kind
in
of like
there.
if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. You might as well just throw your hands up, and you got to just laugh and go on.
And I kind of think that's the way Frank Proffitt and whoever the other relative was. I think that was kind of like, well, not as much else we can do about it, but just kind of sing about it.
Yeah.
And there's a verse in the song about all I got for Christmas was a pair of overalls. And I'm sure Pap could relate to that, and many people of that generation could relate to that, where unlike kids, even when we were growing up, and especially kids now, you just got a massive pile of presents. They maybe got one or two things. Yeah. They might have got a new pair of clothes.
And an orange or something.
Yeah, one stick of candy cane or something.
Yeah.
So he related to that part of the song. And going back to that idea of the comical hard times, there were several songs that Pap and I liked or tried to sing that kind of, things were so dismal it almost became funny. Makes me think of a Tom T. Hall song that he wrote about an old African-American fellow that sat by the side of the road when his work was done, and he'd watch the nice cars go by that he couldn't afford, and he would sing songs, make up kind of bluesy songs. And a verse in the Tom T. Hall song says, "Lawdy, lawdy, lawdy, lawd," was sometimes all you'd hear. Like there might be an entire verse that's all it was like lawdy, lawdy, lawdy.
Yeah.
And as Frank Proffitt Jr. is singing that song, he finishes a verse and he goes to play in it, and he says, "Lord have mercy," and he meant that seriously about the situation, but at the same time, to me and Pap, it was somehow comical.
Yeah.
Kind of bittersweet, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's why we really like the song and like to fool around with the song. And you were asking me, had I heard anybody else sing it? At the time we sang it, no. But then when we uploaded it, I saw that the Old Crow Medicine Show did the song. And they did it kind of their style, maybe jazzed it up a little bit, so to speak. And it seemed like they maybe made some more verses, or at least sang verses I hadn't heard.
Yeah.
And I would say when they did it, that probably paid a pretty nice royalty to the Proffitt family.
Yeah.
So that's good for them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
But anyway, that's a little bit about the song. And to add to what you're saying about the Ever Which Way Around, Pap really liked that because he said it made him think of one of his friends from way back in the day that you've probably heard a lot of stories about, and that is Woody Franklin.
Oh, yeah.
And Pap said that's just like something Woody would say. I love you every which way around.
Yeah.
Things that kind of like a Yogi Berra-ism.
Yeah.
Sort of doesn't make sense, but then sort of in another way makes perfect sense.
Right, yeah.
He really liked that part of it. And you were talking about how we use the word ever. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Katie often, very often, probably all the time, she does not use the word every. She only uses the word ever.
Yeah.
I got ever one of them.
Yeah.
And in the song that Corey wrote, Brasstown, the word every is in that song. And as we were recording it, Katie sang it as ever.
Yeah.
And Corey made her change it because
every.
That's not the correct word.
Right, yeah.
Katie didn't like it, but she did change it for the record.
Yeah.
But I have secretly noticed
that
and watched that anytime we have ever sung that or played that song, performed that song in public, she says ever.
Yeah.
She does not say
And I don't
every.
even notice it because I probably say ever a lot too instead of every. Yeah.
Well, I probably just notice it mainly because of being a lit major when I was in college.
Yeah.
And I will add this too. Some people might find this interesting. So you had the Appalachian Studies class. One of my first classes in my third year of college, when I transferred from Young Harris to UNCA, was Appalachian literature. And the teacher, she was Appalachian, but a very different Appalachian culture than I had because she was farther out, more in the middle of the state, had a very different accent than I have. But it was a great class, and I was introduced to great Appalachian authors like James Steele. Got to learn a lot more about that whole West Virginia, Kentucky experience of Appalachia. So you and I both had great experiences with Appalachian classes, but it was a different time. Corey and Katie, when they went to college and they took Appalachian Studies, it was anything but. There was nothing celebrating Appalachian culture, sadly. It was only looking at it through a negative lens. It was all very political, and they should have probably called it Appalachian shaming because that's really what the class was about.
Yeah.
The person teaching it really didn't know about Appalachia, hadn't grown up in it.
No.
It was went on and on about racism. And a lot of times in your channel here, Celebrating Appalachia, not that you try to cover up anything negative about Appalachia, because let's be honest, there is no culture that doesn't have some negatives.
Right.
It's human nature. You got good and bad. But you've talked about stereotypes. Well, that is a stereotype that Appalachian people are racist. I'm 48 years old, grew up in Appalachia, and in that whole time I maybe have known 2 people that I would say were racist. And I am making a difference. And it was, you could tell it was coming from ignorance in their background and in their upbringing. there is a difference between maybe being prejudiced and being full-on racist, but that's about, I don't know how many you feel like you've encountered.
Yeah, it's
but
like
maybe
not,
two.
Right, not, and it's we wasn't raised like that. I didn't raise my kids like that. Yeah, it's just not a common,
No.
like you're saying, it's a stereotype. It's like the same kind of humorous stereotype, or humorous to some people, is that everybody in Appalachia has a moonshine still. We grew up in a house where no alcohol was drunk anyway,
Right.
but we didn't know anybody that made moonshine. I still don't know anybody that makes moonshine, so no. And it's just not a common thing, like people, kind of the same stereotype of where people would think, well, everybody in Appalachia drinks shine and has a still in the backyard. No, not really. It does exist in some places for sure, but it's just not,
It's not common.
You can't, it's not common.
But nothing about that class. It was frustrating for them. It made them, angry. Probably sometimes made them sad. But nothing about that class caused them to walk away from it with a negative
No, because they
view
knew
or
the
shame
truth.
about their heritage.
They knew the truth, yeah.
Sadly, probably most of the other kids in the class, not really knowing better, probably believed a lot of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it is a great song, the Poor Man Blues. It has kind of an interesting little awkward place in it in terms of the timing, which comes right after, "There ain't a thing for a poor man in this world." And that's the part that Pap and I had to work out a little bit how we were going to do that. I noticed the Old Crow Medicine Show, they approached that a certain way.
Yeah, it is just a really great song. And I think, going back to how you was talking about you and Pap were drawn to those kind of songs, I think I am too. I know I am, but I think part of the reason is kind of because we come from a humble background. So but I would say we come from a humble background, even me and Paul growing up. Even today still, but always with a hope for the future kind of thing, like that. Even though you come from the humble times of not, like when Pap was growing up, he would tell like this one story of when he was a boy just living down the road a little ways, and he was the oldest in his family. I don't even think maybe maybe Henry and Carrie hadn't been born, but at least not Henry probably. But anyway, they were poor, and they didn't have much to eat. And there was at that time an older boy, kind of a teenage boy, 17, 18 years old, that was kind of strange and would just kind of wander around. And it seemed like every other day or whenever, he'd show up at supper time. Well, in those days, you couldn't tell him it wasn't welcome. You just didn't do stuff like that. So of course they fed him. But Pap's father, Wade, although he fed him, he kind of resented it because that boy was taking food that they didn't necessarily have out of the mouth of his children and his wife and him. It meant they didn't get to eat as much. So definitely hard times when you had to worry about if you had enough food to feed yourself. But all that while, they had a joyous life. They were happy. So a lot of those old songs are kind of like that, kind of make you feel like, you can weather the tough times and get through them, and what is it, every which way, I love you every which way around. It'll be okay. It's going to be okay. Tomorrow will always be a better day. And of course that hope probably plays into, because we are believers, religious people, plays into that part too, that it'll all work out okay. But I think that's...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's part of the reason that we were all drawn to them, because we come from, especially Pap, not so much me and Paul, but still, in the scheme of things, from a humble place where, you didn't always have everything you needed or everything you wanted. Money was really tight and those kind of things.
And it's a peppy song. It's
Yeah.
not a slow...
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, it's a song you could kind of clog to.
Yeah, like I said, it's a very, very fun song to play. Always thought on the bass kind of pulls you along, and just tells such a vivid story. You can kind of see them in their overalls in the dusty field working and praying for rain, and then it, washing everything away. But then him saying he knew it'd be all right. He knew it was going to be okay one way or another.
If you like songs like that, another good one you could check out, old Flatt and Scruggs song, I Still Think the Good Things Outweigh the Bad. Yeah. And it comments on what you just said, that, this is really rough times, but it's overall going to be okay. Yeah. It has a verse about high water taking all the crops. It has about how working so hard and then really giving almost all of it to the landowner because you're sharecropping. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the theme of the song is, I still think the good things outweigh the bad overall.
Yeah, and our Papa Wade and our great-grandfather Benjamin, which me and Paul neither one knew ever, but was a sharecropper. That's where, when Daddy was born, when Pap was born, that's where they were on the Hallshaw farm here close to us as sharecroppers. That's what they were. So definitely humble beginnings. But we hope you enjoyed hearing us talk about the song a little, and now we hope that you enjoy seeing this old video from 2011, is that what I said, 2011, of me and Pap and Paul doing the song.